You're going to hear a lot about supply chains for the next 20 minutes or so. I hope that this won't be the first time you hear about them. Actually, I'm on a mission to make you care about supply chains, where things come from. And I hope you'll agree, at least after this talk, that knowing where things come from is essential. It's radical, and it's also very, very cool. So, Tom told you about my past, kind of a reformed gadgeteer. I was at the Media Lab at MIT for a while, and I don't know if you've been there, if you know about the Media Lab. It's actually a conspiracy to put microchips in every single aspect of your daily life. So if there's a microchip in your water pitcher, if there's one in your wallet, if there's one in your bathroom mirror, you'll have us to thank for that. And I was going through a bit of a mid-grad school crisis about 5 years ago in this. There we go. In this lab. Let me cue up the talk. Surrounded by these gadgets, these blinking lights, these gizmos, really the future of technology. And in the midst of all these gadgets, there's, in the basement of the Media Lab, a very nice piano. It's a Bosendorfer. It's an antique. It's, of course, something that people have found a way to stick computer chips into. And piano is a very special thing because actually it seems out of place in the middle of all this technology, but actually the piano was the gadget of the 19th century. If you were a well-to-do middle-class family, the one thing you wanted wasn't an iPod or an iPhone, it was a piano. And that was really the birth of the modern supply chain, I think. The piano has ivory keys. It's a very special piano. And you all know the story of ivory. You all know how the poaching has decimated African elephant populations. This is all well known, but you probably don't know how it all started, which is essentially this middle class that came up after the Industrial Revolution, millions of people looking for products that previously had only been available to the kings and queens, the richest people on earth. And one of those materials that was the most highly sought after, it could be sculpted into a lot of shapes, was ivory. And it was used for these piano keys. It was also used a lot for billiards. It was another very popular gadget at the time. So the story of ivory back then was that you had, for the first time, millions of people wanting stuff. There was no way to get that stuff made anywhere near them. The poachers were sending back tusks. And every time they went back to get more, they had to go a little bit farther inland into the African continent. They had to bring the military along. It got kind of dangerous. And little by little, the whole continent was invaded for tusks and other resources with the military. And something else happened. The tusks that arrived in Europe started getting smaller and smaller, so you could only make 8 billiard balls out of one, and then you could make 7, and then you could make 6. It just kept getting smaller. What happened, obviously, is that the poachers had been killing smaller and smaller elephants until finally there were no more elephants coming up because they had killed the old and the young. That supply chain story for me, it's about gadgets. It's about something people wanted. It's also the first time that so many people wanted something so badly that they basically killed the supply, and they had no idea that they had done it. It took decades before they found out that they had run out of ivory, and that's really the story here. What happened when we stopped knowing where things came from, stopped caring, and stopped actually being able to have any connection to the cultures and the societies who make the things we buy? What impact has that had, and how do we get beyond it? So at the Media Lab, I wasn't putting ivory in things. We were putting computer chips in things. This is what's in a computer chip. It's almost like we took the periodic table and tried to take as many of the elements on the planet and shove them into something that fits on the head of a pin. That's a pretty impressive treasure. If you think about, all the metals and all the gems that the richest kings and emperors could have had, it doesn't touch what you have in your hand when you're holding your cell phone. And some of them like gold and platinum and silver, some of them are so rare that we only have a few years left of them. One of them, indium, is what makes flat screens possible. Most people think we have about 10 years supply. I mean, these are just a story of materials, but remember, when you press all of them into a chip, you can almost never get them back out. So it's a big deal. There's no such thing as recycling a computer. But that's just a story of things, right? What about the places? So I dug a little deeper, said, all right, these things must come from places. Let's map it out. Let me find out what's in my laptop. And it's, again, amazing. I mean, for the first time ever, we've been able to have the collaboration of millions of people around the planet to make one single object. So this is 50 materials, at least 25 different countries, the materials zigzagging the globe, hundreds of thousands of miles traveled. Your iPhone has had a much more interesting life than you. It has met millions of people. It has flown around the world several dozen times. But then there's the human impact. And so you've heard about Foxconn. Now people are talking about the labor standards in the computer supply chain. So you know a little bit about the suicides and about the conditions. Now let me tell you, Foxconn probably has some of the best labor conditions in the entire computer supply chain. What you don't hear about are the conditions at the very end, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 steps removed. And this is a little bit disturbing, so you might want to look away. But I'm going to zoom into 4 different places in this map. The first is Peru, where we get a lot of our mercury and our lead and our gold. Now, the tailings from the mines and the refineries in Peru have been polluting the air and the water and the communities there for decades. Now, another little-known fact is that tin, of which there's a few hundred grams in your laptop, is all mined from, well, half of the world's tin right now comes from those 2 islands, those little islands off the coast of the mainland in Indonesia. And it's entirely illegal to mine tin on these 2 islands because it's mined only by artisanal means, which essentially looks like this. If you Google for tin mining on Bangka Island, you'll see videos of people working in these kinds of conditions. It gets worse. You've probably heard about tantalum, cobalt. These are materials that are sourced primarily from the Congo. These minerals have been one of the main sources of funding for the civil war, responsible for killing somewhere between 5 and 10 million people in the last decade. And they're used in cell phones. And this is the one that I just found recently. The mine that supplies 12% of the world's platinum today, that's the mine. In August, South African police killed 34 striking miners at this mine. So there's no doubt that we are all connected to these activities. But maybe for the first time ever, we can actually see that. Moment of pause. Okay, so now the bad news. Outsourcing has made it almost impossible for companies to know where products are coming from. Sounds hard to believe, right? What happened in the 80s when companies started getting things manufactured overseas is that companies stopped being manufacturers, they started being consumers. And when you become a consumer, all that you care about is the product looks right, works right, shows up on time, good price. You stop having to know where it came from. As the markets grew, you had to have more and more suppliers, you had to have middlemen, intermediaries, distributors, people to get all those products on the store shelf because Nike doesn't outsource to one factory. The same shirt is made by dozens or hundreds of different factories. Now, this was way before the internet, so it was actually impossible to know where these things came from. And certainly, you didn't have a way to reach people in the field, in the places I showed you, and to bring back documentation, to bring back even a receipt or a contract from the field. Now, it's evident today, if you follow the news, that this is the case, because there's hardly a month that goes by without a major story about a supply chain breaking down. And they become so overextended that the merest event, so a flood somewhere, the floods in Thailand this year crippled the computer industry. Turns out most of the hard drives in the world were made in Thailand. Toys are coming back contaminated with toxic metals that could only come out of computers. Food is coming back contaminated, and it takes weeks or months to find out how that happened. It doesn't stop And the fact that you see these major brands, these big companies, hit with these interruptions so frequently should point out that they just don't have a good way to keep track of where things are coming from. And it's bad for business. Okay, the good news. So 10 years ago, you would have said it was actually impossible computationally to know where things come from. Now, if only there was some technology that came up in the meantime that allowed millions of people around the world to communicate about the most mundane things in extraordinary detail and in real time. That's right. Supply chains are the biggest social networks on Earth. And if you look at that map of the computer, you're actually talking about a social network that bridges the poorest and the richest people on the planet through the handoff of products, granted. But as you saw, you can go on YouTube, you can see videos people have shot in the places where these things happen. There's virtually no excuse for not knowing, but more importantly, there's now tools so that you could actually envision one day soon friending the people who make the things you buy. There's no reason they can't be part of your extended social network. And that opens up a whole world of accountability, but also potential. So that's what Sourcemap is about. Sourcemap is a website, sourcemap.com. It's a public resource, I like to think. It's a place where anyone, any company can publish anything they know about any supply chain. We still need to learn a lot about them, as you saw. It's a place where you can follow products from the mines to your hand. It's a place where you can zoom in. That's actually the worker housing at the Foxconn plant, those little skyscrapers. That's the plant, so you get an idea of scale. And this is an amazing thing, because for the first time, there's a platform that can actually connect you with the people who make the stuff you buy. And it can do it in a completely open way. So you can be a small business, you can be a big business, you can be a journalist. In fact, what we really do is we help companies find out what they're going to publish on our website. By connecting them, it's a kind of think of it as a LinkedIn for a supply chain. So the company links to their supplier, then their supplier links to their supplier to their supplier, and before you know it, you're going to have tens or hundreds of thousands of people communicating in real time about exactly what's going on. Is the product going to arrive on time? Are the people getting paid? Are they showing up to work? What's going on across that network? So this is actually what we do. It's actually supply chain software with a public-facing angle. So then I'm going to talk a little bit about now the remarkable people that we've worked with in the past couple of years since Sourcemap was started, who have been what I would call good supply chain citizens. So what does it mean today to have labor standards, to have environmental standards, if the things you buy, the things you use on a daily basis, the food you eat, the clothes you wear, were not made according to those standards? What does it mean to be a citizen when everything comes from another country? Well, the idea of belonging, the idea of information, the idea of voting needs to radically change. So we are citizens of supply chains, whether or not we like it. We're citizens of global supply chains by and large. And with that comes some responsibilities and some rights. We have the right to be informed, and for the first time, I think I showed you that we can be informed as private consumers, but also as companies. Companies have a lot more leverage, and sometimes they can make a lot more impact with knowing where things come from. And then, of course, we have the right to vote. And once you know, then every action you make with that knowledge can be targeted at having the world that you each want. And it's not going to be the same for each of us or for each community. Let me start local. Robert Harris was the first user of Sourcemap. He's a caterer in Porter Square, Season of Taste Catering. He came to me and said, I'm really sick of all my competitors saying that they source locally whenever possible. It doesn't mean anything. I want to actually tell people what the food is that I'm serving them, where it comes from. Robert wants to know the people who are harvesting the food. Why? Because he wants to know he's getting quality food, he wants to know who he's getting it from, he wants to know he can make the best food for his consumers. And that's as simple as that. Good food requires you to know where it's coming from. And if you knew some of what I know about food supply chains, you would insist on people who know where your food came from. He started making maps, and by the way, I just want to point this out, right? It's not all local. You can't just say, I locally source whenever I want to. You have to show the parts that aren't local, and you have to show why and justify why. Okay, Laura Kissel. So there's a lot of journalists using our platform now to do some pretty amazing things that completely defy conceptions about supply chains because they've gone to the places where things come from. Laura made a documentary called Cotton Road. The documentary shows that cotton coming from South Carolina actually gets shipped to China to be made into clothes and then gets sold in retail back again in South Carolina. So even though things are made in China, they may actually be made right next door. Okay, and the standards that you apply next door can end up influencing certainly the quality of material, whether it's organic or not, that they're getting in China. And there's some beautiful things about knowing the people who make clothes because it's not some giant evil distant story. It's actually people. You can see where they have lunch. You can meet them. You can talk to them. It's a really powerful thing, and I think you're going to see more and more documentaries that take you to the source. Jenna Burrell did something also fascinating. She followed the tail end of a supply chain. So what happens to your computers once you throw them away? And again, completely counterintuitive. So she followed computers that are being thrown away by the New York Public Library all the way to Ghana, to Accra, where they're not thrown away. They become the computers in the internet cafes. So actually, throwing away and getting rid of an old computer is a great thing because then you make it possible for somebody to have access to computers and have access to the internet. Now that's the happy story. She found actually the property stickers on the computers in the cafes that told her exactly where they came from. But then, of course, there's the flip side, which is while we're very careful about the quality with which we make computers, we're not so careful about the way that they're disposed of. And you've probably seen some of these images, but these are a lot more poignant to me because she's actually indicated exactly where she took those pictures, and you could go check it out for yourself. For me, these slides of the afterlife of products are really telling. They're really poetic because you realize that you're only holding something for a little while. Somebody else handed it off to you, and pretty soon you're going to hand it off to someone after that. You never really own anything. Anita is a fashion designer in Mumbai. India is a spectacularly diverse place. You have the richest and the poorest people on earth.
So that made sense to me that there's some kind of security that's provided to the farmers where their life is not one endless, dependent on the weather and dependent on the local money lender, where they lead very, very highly insecure lives. And today we who live in the cities with growth lead very, very secure lives. And it's not the case with them still, and it's at the end of the day one country. So. Yeah.
She's explaining why she switched all of her products over to organic cotton. It's because the farmers can better afford the lack of fertilizers, the lack of genetically modified seeds. And the way she did it and assured that that was the case was by tracing the supply chain from the rich parts of Mumbai to some of the poorest places, including these cotton farms and these gins in Orissa. Okay? And it's something that you should expect to be able to do pretty soon when you scan a product at your local store. It's business. In this case, she cares about not global citizenship, but still supply chain citizenship in India. Yama Siddiqui is head of sustainability at Office Depot. He cared about the same thing when he was trying to convince his customers to pay more for recycled paper. So we connected him to his paper mills, his pulp mills, and to the cities in the Midwest where all of the paper is thrown away and then turned into your Office Depot recycled paper. You can scan that barcode. We'll actually find you where you are, and we'll trace that piece of paper you have in your hand to where it was thrown away by someone else. So again, it's pretty poetic. You have the works of authors and poets and who knows that have been recycled into your printouts. This is totally possible. It's totally something to be expected. And I think you're going to see businesses do more and more of it. This is the best story, and I'll close with this one. Sam runs a brewery in the Highlands of Scotland.
Most people who work at the brewery work locally. Well, most of them were born locally. Therefore, protection of this ground and the resource that we have, and is in everybody's heads. It's just an underpinning thing that we all think is the right thing to do.
Sam wants to do the right thing, but Sam did something very good for business. Sam got all of her competitors to share what their supply chains look like. Okay, so this is the green dots are all the breweries in the Highlands of Scotland, very rugged terrain. Every one of these breweries had to drive a little truck down to the south of Scotland, actually the north of England, every day to get their beer put into bottles. Okay, so usually competitors don't share. Like I told you, even suppliers don't share. You get these people to share. And what did they find? Well, it's like the Heisenberg principle. Once you see something, you immediately change it. So as soon as they saw how inefficient that entire regional industry was, they showed this to the government. They got loans. They built a bottling plant in the north of Scotland. Okay, so imagine for these small businesses, this one little bit of transparency, what it did for them in terms of competitiveness, in terms of creating jobs, in terms of localizing, in terms of reducing carbon footprint. Imagine if that kind of transparency was happening on a larger scale. That's what we're here to do, to make better products, better communities. And thank you very much.
Thank you. That's great. Stick around with you for a second. Leonardo Bonanni, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Supply chain transparency. Wow, now Leonardo, before you stepped up here, we were having a little fun. I apologize. As I listen to this is really mind-blowing. The implications of this are really mind-blowing. First of all, just to be sitting here and have you zoom us around the world to Peru and to the artisanal tin mining in Indonesia, not like artisanal tomatoes in the Congo, and the police gunning down, striking platinum miners in South Africa. So point made, when you see it, it has a big impact. Lots of questions here. First of all, industry pushback. I mean, are you the Julian Assange of sourcing data? The WikiLeaks, are you going to end up in jail for challenging the powers that be here? And I'm not entirely facetious.
No.
These are not pictures that they want associated with the ring on your wedding day. Da, 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 da.
You know, that's absolutely right. And I think a lot of, there is a lot of muckraking and a lot of whistleblowing that can happen.
Isn't that what this is? Isn't your whole notion muckraking?
Well, you know,
if it's not muckraking, what's the point? If it's all made by angels sitting on clouds, we don't need this.
Absolutely. I mean, the point is that it's collaborative and that it is honest, transparent. But I'll tell you the unexpected thing is when we started showing that demo at the Media Lab, companies came to me and they said, can you help me find out what my supply chain looks like? So it's become so pertinent, and I'm happy to keep talking with you after this about more stories. It's become so pertinent for these companies to know where these things are, not just from a PR exposure point of view, but because they're not getting products dependably, of quality, on time, on cost, and they realize that's because they don't know.
So there's a corporate, an ROI kind of need to know, but I feel that your initial motivation in the product is built around a more moral impetus, unless
Absolutely.
I mistake you
No,
as a man and a human being. I don't think we do. So this brings me to another question. I mean, do we want to know? Simon Johnson said, I couldn't handle the truth. I immediately said, we can't handle the truth, to spread that around. So it wasn't just me. But seriously, I mean, you know, do we want to see the sweatshops where our Christmas tree ornaments were painted? Where our carpets were made by kids? Do we want to know? Where our menorah was plated?
I guess
I could go on.
I guess I want to know, and I don't really.
But I mean, you know,
I don't care if you do or not.
People in their millions flock into department stores. Yeah. Well, but it matters in this way.
No, it does.
I mean, you can get all the information, but if people are just say, forget it, I don't want to know, then they have to know, right? Or else it's kind of shouting in the dark.
There is a myth of information overload, and I agree. But by and large, you know, what we've seen is that this is just a competitive advantage. If a company is proud to let you know what they're selling you, what it's made of, where it comes from, if they believe you have the right to know where things come from, they will win in the marketplace and they'll bring the rest with them.
So you think people would change their buying behavior on the basis of knowing the circumstances of products creation?
I'll betray my heritage, but I'm half French, half Italian.
Really?
There's a belief that where things come from actually matters more, in many cases, food, clothing, things like that, than anything else. That's right. And I think that's just a cultural belief. We can be just as concerned about being locavores as we can about being purchasers of sustainably sourced laptops, and it's just a matter of getting the information out there.
So here's a question. If we would come through this work to know and act morally on what we learn about production and where things come from, if that was adopted, you know, mass scale, what changes would we see? I mean, if Sourcemap had been around and really fully working 30 years ago, would Walmart have failed? would sweatshirts still be made in South Carolina?
You know, I'll tell
all
you.
that stuff that first came to Walmart out of China was not made in spas.
You're absolutely right.
And it put all of America out of manufacturing.
You know, the story with the Scottish breweries is a telling one. When I say, you know, it's about citizenship. It's not about the right solution. Obviously, the Scottish people were very happy to have that new brewery. Somebody lost a lot of customers somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And we're each going to have to vote for our communities, our personal interests, our families. I think you know, what I know would have been avoided if Sourcemap had been around is a lot of the massive disruptions in which, after Fukushima, for example, it took 2 weeks for GM to notice that parts weren't coming in and they had to shut down plants. I know that those disasters would have been avoided. Whether policy would have changed, I think so. And I think you would have seen people investing more in making their local industries attractive as they saw the kind of flows of trade outside the country.
And to the MIT Media Lab conspiracy, which it looks like you're part of, when does some portion of success come? When does some significant percentage of global products have a chip in it and be traced?
I expect in the next 6 months, you'll see major brands publishing supply chains on our website. I expect in the next 2 to 5 years, most of the Fortune 500 will need to have some sort of traceability in place like this.
Wow, this is utterly eye-opening and kind of mind-blowing, and we're very grateful to you. Leonardo Bonanni, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you so much.